I'm not broken, but a lot of things in our world are. And that was what was impacting me. And so I always have that message of like, maybe it's not you, and maybe it's the systems around you.
Hey there, welcome to Unboxing It, a podcast by Lara Wellman and me, Rowan Knox. Each week we tackle societal ideas and expectations that can stop us from leading full and authentic lives. We're so glad you're joining us. Let's get started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unboxing It. I am Lara.
And I'm Rowan.
And we're really excited because we have our first guest with us today.
Yeah, somebody actually agreed to come on this podcast with us, even though we talk so much.
We're very fun to talk to, Rowan. We're going to have lots of people who want to do this.
Lots and lots of people. This is called manifesting, and I'm here for it.
Yes. So today we have Misty Pratt with us, and I'm going to read her bio so you all know how wonderful she is. So Misty Pratt is a science communicator who has written for publications including Broadview, Mindful.org, and Today's Parent. She lives in Ottawa, Ontario, and her first book is called All in Her Head. And that was why we wanted to have her on, because she's written this book about a topic that we think is really interesting and that we are ready to unbox today. So, Misty, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I was wondering if you could start off by just telling everybody what is All in Her Head about.
So I often say it's a feminist manifesto to reframe our mental health. But more precisely, it's a nonfiction book. It's what's called a blended memoir. So it's a little bit about me and my journey with mental illness and through the mental health care system. And then I also bring in the sciencey side. So what does the science say about women's mental health? What does it say about gender bias, about misogyny in the medical system? And I share a lot of stories from women around the world because I know that my experience is one experience. It absolutely is not representative of everybody. And so I wanted to get a number of different voices into the book that could speak to different countries and different lived experiences of mental illness and what it meant for them. So yeah, it's a mix of all those things, and I hope people are enjoying it.
That's amazing. We certainly both have some strong ties to this topic, but obviously you do too, because you did write a blended memoir, which I've written a little bit myself. So I know a little bit about this as
Yes,
well.
you do.
And it is an interesting blend because you're not just reporting research, you're not just reporting what else is out there and talking about that. You also have to get pretty personal. And in terms of your reasons behind writing this book, can you tell us a little bit about what was it in your own journey that really made you think this has to be told to many more people, this has to be shared with many more people?
Yeah, it was mainly my grandmother and her experience. So, my grandmother developed bipolar disorder in her mid 50s. So, she was a lot older, and this was in the 80s, back when no one really understood about menopause and changes in the brain and mental illness. And so, she had a really rough experience. Like, they didn't quite know what was wrong with her for a long time. She was in and out of emergency rooms because she was with a partner who was an alcoholic. They thought she was an alcoholic. And so it was just this really difficult journey for her. And then even once they sort of landed on a diagnosis and started to medicate her, they medicated her with so many different meds, like 2 antidepressants and lithium and antipsychotics and like all these other things that led to really bad side effects. And she was never happy with her diagnosis. She felt better when she wasn't medicated. So I wanted to tell her story, but I realized as I was exploring it and thinking about it, it wasn't just her story. This was something that had happened to many women and was still happening. And so I started to look into the history of mental illness and hysteria and the diagnosis of hysteria and what that all meant for women's health today. So yeah, that was a little bit about why I wanted to write it. And I think too, I say it's not just her story because it's also mine, right? I couldn't kind of write from her perspective. She's gone, she's passed. And I wanted to write from my perspective of what it was like to have a grandmother who was an incredible person, but also had her challenges and growing up, what that meant for me and my own mental health.
Mm. Tell us a little bit about the diagnosis of hysteria. What did that mean? When a woman presented with certain symptoms, she was given that diagnosis, correct?
So it meant different things at different times. And this is what is so fascinating about hysteria to me is that when I say that, people think of the 1800s and they think of doctors diagnosing mainly white women with kind of like, hysteria, which was like a disease thought to be kind of a nervous condition. But it goes back way further than that. So you can go all the way back to, ancient Greek times when they were diagnosing it as a biological problem. His thought was that the uterus was like wandering around the body and it was placing pressure on your organs. And that was the disease. It was thought to cause all of these problems for you. And then it kind of like went underground a little bit for a little while. And then we entered the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, when we had the witch hunts. And hysteria kind of morphed into this idea of women as evil, as temptresses of men, that we had to kind of stamp out this evilness. And in around the 1600s, the first early physicians pulled it out of there and said, no, 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 stop. We need to not burn women at the stake anymore. Maybe something's really biologically wrong with them. And so it went back to the body. And so it's had this like pendulum, like swinging back and forth between a spiritual mind problem and a body based problem. And we are still, even though we don't diagnose people with hysteria, there's still a lot that's in our health system that's tied to this notion of like women are imbalanced. They have imbalanced hormones, imbalanced brain chemistry. And so they're not stable, right? We need to do something about this instability. So yeah, it's still with us today.
It hits us from all the angles, right? So either it's all in our heads and it's not real, or it's because biologically we are plagued with a uterus climbing all around our body, which is very distracting and upsetting, I suppose.
Right. And the thing is, it's not to say that there's no such thing as like hormonal issues. Of course there is. We know from the little evidence we have so far that like, yes, hormones impact our health. But we need to better understand what does that mean because men are hormonal too. Like men have bigger changes during the day in hormones than women have over a day. But women have bigger changes in like monthly. So I think we have this like very rigid idea. And of course, this goes into the whole gender binary and sex binary of like what it means to be male, female, man, woman, and how that affects our well being. And we, I think, need to know that some of it is biological, but lots of it is like society, lots of it is how we're socialized.
Which is the way things have been in medicine and psychology for a very, very long time. And there's this idea that everything is the body or everything is the brain. And then we forget that the brain is part of the body
Mm-hmm.
and that everything is, hormonal. And I mean, again, what you were saying, hormones, that's a real thing. Like as a trans person, I have bypassed menopause because I started testosterone right when menopause, like perimenopause, was taking hold. So I avoided a lot of that. But let me tell you, it took a year to get my testosterone levels to a place where I felt good most of the time. Not depressed on one end if it was too low, not anxious if it was too high, right? Sort of somewhere right in the middle. But there is more to it than that. Do you think that women are often discounted when they say that there are, say, for example, real outside pressures going on in their lives?
I don't even know if it's discounted so much as, yeah, I guess it is discounted. Like, we just don't pay attention to it. We don't address it in healthcare. Like healthcare has always been very much, as you said, the body, the brain, right? We don't talk about social determinants of health. What is going on in your life? Are you living with a partner and facing violence in the home? Are you struggling with burnout, which many, many people are, right? Are you facing poverty? Are you living, kind of day by day? And all of those things, we don't pay attention to them in the healthcare system. I think we're getting better. You know, Practitioners and researchers will say, like, yes, we're doing a better job now. But I think we're still so siloed that they're only kind of focusing, you go to the specialist, they focus on the ear, nose, and throat. That's it, right? And then you go to the other doctor and they focus on the brain. And so it's very challenging for a person to be treated as a whole person, I think.
Yeah, the holistic side of that is non-existent.
Yeah,
Not to mention,
absolutely.
and I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but I'm pretty sure in research, they researched men and not women for the longest time, right? Like the
Mhm.
information we have about women's bodies and women's mental health and illness is not based on women.
Yeah, exactly. Most of the studies we have are in not only male humans, male mice.
Mhm.
So they, for the longest time, weren't even using female mice. And in fact, if you go and take a look at the research now, it's still like a pretty dismal percentage of papers that are using male mice instead of both.
Well, this is what I heard. I'm not a good researcher at all, just to be clear. But I recall hearing that one of the reasons they used male mice was because female mice were reacting strangely because of their cycles.
That's what they thought.
Oh,
It's a belief that we are messy. Our data is messy because the hormones are making us like, right? But this again goes back to, okay, well, if you look at somebody who's biologically like was born as a male, they also have hormonal shifts, right? But we have a socialized belief that it's the females that respond more to that. And then so they think the data will be messy. That's the word they use. And so they don't want to include the females, or at least up until this point. So it's very, very slow to change. Like we're still, Dr. Lisa Glia, who's at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, CAMH, she just published a paper that came out and found, I think it's still like less than 10% of studies funded by our major funding body here in Canada, CIHR, don't include or don't analyze for sex differences. And the money that's going to projects is going to kind of male dominated diseases where, we're not looking at the diseases that are female dominant. So we're still, unfortunately, trying to catch up, trying to change that. And yet now we are facing roadblocks thanks to all of the politics in the United States. We're reversing course. We're going to go back to the 1600s. So, yeah, it's scary.
And for people who have been maybe living under a rock when it comes to what's happening to the scientific community right now, I'm sure you can speak to this better than I can, Misty. But my understanding, just as a human rights activist, is in the US, where a lot of the research is being done, where a lot of the grants are being distributed or being, doled out to people, to other researchers, you're seeing this erasure of first pre-existing studies that have to do with women, any marginalized group, et cetera, et cetera. And you're also seeing that research on a lot of people who are not, frankly, cisgender white men is not being conducted. And that's impacting everybody, correct?
Absolutely. They're pulling grants left, right, and center. People, I've interviewed recently some researchers in the States for other stories I'm working on, and people are so scared. Like you can see it visibly in the stress that they're carrying, not knowing if their work is going to go forward. And as you said, it's absolutely anything not related to kind of the white cisgender male stuff, right? That we seem to think is the most important. All of that is the stuff that's under the chopping block, like what might be going and what has already gone. I mean, I will say one sort of big major one there was an announcement at one point that they were canceling the Women's Health Initiative, which is this huge study that's been going on for decades in the States at all different sites. So this is like one of the biggest studies ever to take a look at women's health related to many different things like menopause. And then they reverse course. So like 3 days later, another announcement. Oh no, we're not going to cancel that. And so it's just living in this state of fear for researchers that we don't know where we're going to be in the next 5 years. And that is scary because we had just started making progress on all of this stuff. And now to reverse and to lose all the progress that we've made is so depressing.
very depressing indeed.
I'm like trying to find a silver lining here. I'm like, well, maybe no, I just feel
No,
depressed.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is very similar to what happened in Nazi Germany, where a lot of research was burned, books were burned, things were erased. And then I'll use transgender research as a good example of that. You had a lot of some of the first surgeries on transgender people, the first research on transgender people, the doctors who worked on people in my community, their work was destroyed. And, here we are, we're starting to catch up again many decades later. And so this is what happens when we destroy work and we erase studies from existence, which is essentially what they're trying to do. And what they have done in some cases is setting that work back. Where do you think that is leaving women? Let's just say, I mean, we're all Canadian, so the three of us are Canadian. From a
Mhm.
Canadian perspective, where does that leave you?
I feel that we do have some hope here. I guess that's it. We do see in how things have gone so far with our latest election that we are in an okay place, I think. What we have is being protected at the moment. The problem is that we haven't seen a major shift in these numbers. So, as I said, that paper that just published recently, less than 10% funded studies. Like, we need to keep going. The momentum has to grow bigger and bigger. We can't pull back. And so I think we have to kind of stay vigilant here in Canada, knowing that in the past, we've had governments who have muzzled our scientists, who have pulled funding for lots of different research. And yes, it was related to the environment and climate change. But in the current environment we're in, I think we could see the same kind of anti DEI stuff, the same anti woke research. Like, anything to do with that could be at risk. And so I think we need to remain really like eyes wide open. Let's just, kind of go into this knowing that this could be a possibility. We're not trying to scaremonger and we're not trying to, freak people out, but just be vigilant. And I think if we can talk to as many people as possible to get to them to understand how important this work is for many different populations, not just women.
And you and I have talked, so I've known Misty for a long time. We've talked about a lot of things. I know the whole all in her head sort of idea is mental health, but it's also chronic illness. And for me, one of the pieces that I thought would be interesting to talk about is the part that is us, because the way society has talked about these things, it's convinced many of us that it is all in our head, right? Like we don't need to go and ask for something, we're being complainers, and we don't therefore advocate for ourselves. And there is a certain amount of being able to get further if you know you're not making stuff up, right? So for
Mm-hmm.
me, endometriosis was something that was a big thing in my life. And it took me 20 years for a doctor to say, oh, this is endometriosis, because my pain was just like considered like normal. Some women, they have a lot of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And when we understand that there's a difference between common and normal, and we stop thinking that we're making a big deal out of things, and we stop talking ourselves into thinking we're fine because we're supposed to, then we're able to advocate for ourselves. We're able to say to doctors, and this came up so many times when I was really sick for a time. And during that time, I encountered a bunch of different specialists. And the amount of times people said, oh, I don't really know much about endometriosis, including people just fresh out of medical school. Like, okay, well, then I think we need to look it up, right? Like, not just like, you don't know it? Fine. Okay, let's go find out more. And I think that when we can stand firmly in the fact that we aren't being hysterical, then we're able to get more of the kind of help that we need.
Mm-hmm. We were chatting before we hopped on this call about my experiences too, and it's very strange or ironic. I'm not sure what the word is that I put this book out in the world and then became very sick for a while and had my own mysterious chronic illness that's still going on. I still don't really have a diagnosis, but it's the exact same experience. I think it's this loss of trust in myself. Like, as each test comes back normal and as each person says, yep, tests are normal, and there's no follow-up or anything, you lose trust in yourself. You start to doubt and you think, am I really like, is it all in my head? Like, did I write an entire book and I was wrong and it is in my head and I'm making it up? And I think the lack of, as you said, the lack of understanding, at one point I ended up in the emergency room and a resident asked me all these questions. And I said, yeah, I'm taking allergy shots. And he said, what are allergy shots? Can you explain those to me? And I was like, are Are you like, my throat was closed. I was in anaphylaxis. I could barely talk. And I'm like, okay. And so I started explaining what allergy shots are, right? And so I think, it's not, I don't want to say that it's lack of knowledge, but again, it's the siloed. You go into school, you train in a specific thing, and that's what you know. And there's no talking between all the silos. And so if you have a chronic illness that covers many different parts of the body, endometriosis is one, too, right? There's lots of different chronic illnesses that cover different parts of the body. You are now seeing different people with different specialties, and no one understands the whole broad aspect. There's nobody looking at the entire picture. And so when you lose that trust in yourself, you do start to wonder if it's you. And I will add, going back to the mental health piece, if you have a mental illness diagnosis in your chart, unfortunately, that's the first thing any physician will go to. So if you show up at a merge, if you go to see a doctor, they will most likely look down that list and they will see bipolar, anxiety, OCD, whatever else, and they'll go, oh, okay, this is what's going on for a lot of people. And I'm not saying there's not practitioners who don't take us seriously and don't listen. They're out there. I've met them and they've cared for me. But for many of us, the label is what they see first. And they go, okay, that's what's going on here, without diving deeper and trying to pinpoint what the problem might be.
And it can be really hard to advocate for yourself in those moments, especially if you're going to the ER. So I had a really bad tooth infection during the pandemic that led to 5 rounds of antibiotics that led to a form of colitis, like an antibiotic induced colitis, which would just flare up all of a sudden and I would be crumpled on the ground, like I can't walk, blacking out almost, that sort of thing. It was really bad. And I went to the hospital once because of it. And I had already at that same hospital had a diagnosis. Now, this is pre-transition. So I am presenting as a woman walking in here with a history of mental illness. I had a bout of, I have PTSD. So my PTSD shortly, a few months before that, had led me into the ER as well. But I was well on my way to feeling a lot better in that sense. But in this moment, the doctor that I got was not the best, honestly. I said, I was in so much pain when this colitis happened 24 hours ago that a whole bunch of muscles in my body tensed up very, very, very badly. I can hardly move. It hurts to breathe. What were you doing before that? He said, after talking to me about what he saw in my chart with mental illness. Then he said, what were you doing before that? And I said, well, that day, I mean, I worked out. I worked out in the morning. Now, I've been working out for 10 years. And I told him that. He's like, well, here's what I think. I think you have some muscle soreness because you worked out. And I'm not going to give you heavy drugs for that. I'm not giving you narcotics for that. I had never asked for narcotics. I was looking for a solution and I needed some pain management for sure. But I said, I have colitis. It is in my chart. He dismissed me, sent me back into the waiting room. He came out about 2 hours later and said, so I had a chance to look at your chart. And yeah, as it turns out, you do have colitis.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks for confirming.
Right, right. So what I said mattered not one bit. Once he saw it in my chart, it was okay. And then I got a medication to help me manage pain and I went home. But this is the way, like, this is an anecdotal experience. Clearly, this is an anecdotal experience, but I am one of many people, and I don't have to tell the people here, but especially women who have been treated that way in that situation. It's misogyny, frankly. It's a societal misogyny. Let's just call it what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. It's the lack of being able to be humble enough to listen and to see somebody as a person and not as some stereotype that you've created in your head unknowingly, not trying to blame you and say you're doing this on purpose, but it's there. And if you're not willing to look at that stereotype that you have about this person in front of you, then you'll never get to a place where you can listen and hear patients. And I think this goes to medical education, that there is very, very little in the curriculum on listening to patients, shared decision making. It's there, like little bits, right? but there's no kind of constant ongoing, like, here's how you work with patients, and not like this hierarchy of you over a patient making the decisions. So that's something that goes back, I think, to this medical system itself that needs to change from the very beginning of when we're training doctors.
And one of the things that I have noticed, again, this is anecdotal, is the relationship, the seeming relationship between stress and illness.
Mm.
And so I have known women in my life. My mother is a great example. She's an amazing woman. She has had an incredible amount of stress, an incredible amount of challenging circumstances in her life that she's had to deal with. And she is one of many women I know who have been in those situations, who have gone on to later, well, first of all, have been dismissed at every turn and have been told, well, you can get therapy and maybe can't afford therapy or whatever, for only for a short while. But their problems are ignored. They're not treated, whether they're being dismissed or because the treatment that they need, say therapy, is not being offered. And over time, have gone on to develop chronic health issues, particularly autoimmune diseases. Did you find anything when you were researching about the relationship between those two things?
Well, funny you should ask, because I feel like that might be in my next project that I'm
Wow.
thinking through right now. Because, yes, I think there is a very, so 80% of people that have autoimmune conditions are women. The number of people dealing with chronic, kind of mysterious, misunderstood illnesses is also, disproportionately women. And so I have recently been trying to decide if I want to jump into this. Also feeling like I'm not well, right? I'm not in the place where I'm feeling 100% myself. So I'm like, do I want to put myself under a whole bunch of stress and potentially illness to look at this? But I would love to start to go down that path and really talk about, like, okay, so what can we do for ourselves? Because I think that that's the big issue. Is I can tell you the research about what has to change. I can say, oh, the medical system has to do this and this and this, and here's what the doctors have to do. But what are the patients? How do we live through that then? Right? How do we live ongoing where someone just keeps telling you it's stress and to go get therapy and you're like, I can't afford therapy, right? That's what I would love to know, is what are the answers? And I suspect we all kind of know that the answer is that we have to learn to live with that in a way that we feel fulfilled and okay, right? And that is a challenge.
It is a challenge, and I think part of this is when we know that we aren't making things up, when we know, like, when we haven't bought into the all in her head piece, then that makes it easier to figure out what's next. It makes it easier to at least get to the place where we can make it through the appointments and the tests, right? Like, we don't feel like we've made it all up. And I think part of the way to get there is to talk about it, because the amount of
Mhm.
things that I've shared just in my own audiences about things like ADHD and endometriosis, which I realize I didn't explain. So if anybody's listening to this and like, you keep saying that word, but I don't know what it is, it's when cells that are similar to what you find inside the uterus get found outside the uterus. And then it can cause organs to stick together and it can cause infertility. And for me, it caused an awful lot of pain. But if nobody's talking about this stuff, if we aren't having conversations with each other, then we don't know that things are common or normal, or that we shouldn't put up with things, or that we need to keep pushing to solve things. And we just sort of try to live with a lot of things that really, really suck.
Mhm. And that's where I think social media has been wonderful for people with chronic illness and mysterious illness and whatever else. I think that's where we can go on and find our people and know that what we're dealing with is obviously something, right? But I think there is a dark side to that too, in that we can get sucked into worlds of misinformation, and we can, you know, I think the medical system needs to be like, what's pushing everyone away? And how do we fix ourselves to better serve and not push people into a situation where they have to rely on a whole bunch of supplements that have no evidence, or like other pseudoscientific things that could be dangerous, even harmful. But that's on them. Like, they need to fix this problem because if they continue down this path, we are still going to go looking for answers anywhere we can because we need to not feel alone. It helps to have that community.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the strengths of women. And I want to touch on this a little bit because I think I have a bit of a unique, maybe not unique, but uncommon experience in being a trans man. I spent 40 plus years in the company of girls and then women. And one of the things that women have that a lot of men don't have is vulnerability. It's not that men can't be vulnerable, it's that it is often shamed. It is frowned upon. It's a sign of weakness for us. Whereas with women, it's often seen as a sign of strength within the community. It's that there's a lot of bonding that happens through sharing those experiences. When it comes to illness, but especially mental illness, many men struggle with mental health and, suicidality, depression, that sort of thing, and don't talk about it ever. It's that whole idea of that makes me weak. I, even in my head right now, would be hard pressed to think of a man in my life where I would feel all the way comfortable going to tell him if I was feeling that way. But I can think of a lot of women I would feel comfortable going to talk to. So if there is any strength, any silver lining, is that I think that women can really band together and be a force for change. We've seen that in a lot of ways. I love the Women's March, for example. I mean, there's a lot of examples of women really showing up and getting the job done or moving things forward. And perhaps men and the medical system that ultimately serves men over women, even today, could learn a thing or two from that. I think it really just, again, it comes down to misogyny. It comes down to not thinking women have quite as much to offer because they're too unstable or they're too preoccupied with children or whatever other reason you might want to throw at them. But I do think that women themselves are the answer to this.
That's such a great point. I agree. And I think the one question I always got a lot when I was promoting the book was, what about the men? Like, why didn't you write about the difficulties they face? And I said, listen, it was one book. I already went way over word count. Like, my experiences growing up as a woman. And so I didn't feel like I could write from that perspective and do it justice. But I think it's needed. And I would say if there are men out there, who have an interest in this, I really hope someone writes a book that can address that side and can address mental illness among men. There are some people that are doing work. So Angela Sturrett is an Indigenous journalist and writer who's currently working on a book about men and about masculinity. And I'm really excited about that. But
Mm.
yeah, I think we need more. I think we need both sides. Like, we have to be able to kind of come together on this, or else we're not going to make any changes.
That, and I think one of the beautiful things about our society, should we get past this anti woke sentiment that is happening right now, is the gender binary harms everybody. It's not that people can't be who they are. Obviously, I'm not somebody who's going to say that, you have to be a certain way. But I do think that the societal rules for women are very harmful to women a lot of the time. The societal rules for men are very harmful to men a lot of the time. And there is this wonderful space where we can recognize that there are differences and also come together and look at ourselves as, like remove the rules around a lot of these things so that we help everybody, men, women, people of any gender, non-binary people. And I think that way, obviously research is needed to study women, to study men, to study non-binary people. We need the various research, but ultimately the goal, wouldn't it be great, is if we could not remove, say, biological differences, but remove all of the rules around who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to behave so that everybody gets served better.
In all
Yeah.
things, all the time. I agree.
Mic drop. Totally. We would all be happier.
We would be.
Come on, people. We can do it.
We could all just stop shitting all over ourselves.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's so much to learn. There's so much to read about. There's so many things we could be doing, and hopefully that will change, and hopefully that we won't have to keep fighting. But if there's for right now in the times we are, is there something that you hope people really take from your book and just from conversations like this that's going to help them moving forward?
I think what I try to get across is that if you are struggling, I want people to realize, and when I realized this like deep in my bones, this is what helped me get over, like it didn't make me healthier or like happier. It just made me be able to endure, I guess, like resilience wise, is that, I'm not broken, but a lot of things in our world are. And that was what was impacting me. And so I always have that message of like, maybe it's not you, and maybe it's the systems around you. And for me, that just gave me freedom to be able to let things go, to say, oh my gosh, like all of you are making me nuts. Like it's not, it's not something wrong with me. And so it gave me this sense of like, okay, like now that I see the world clearly, I can move forward in it. And I don't know why, but that seemed to help me. But I do want to just add one other thing that I've been reflecting on lately too, about this whole idea of like losing our trust and losing our confidence because of being just constantly gaslit or like made to feel like we're crazy, that it's all in our head. Is I've found just small things of getting back to trusting myself, like doing something. Recently, I went rock climbing and I took a beginner's course in rock climbing. I have no upper body strength. I am scared. I'm terrified when I'm on the wall. I'm terrified of falling. But that little thing of just getting up and doing it and reaching the top of some of these little climbs, it was enough to kind of be like, I can do this hard thing. And I'm seeking out those moments of like, how do I bring back this trust in myself? Because it gives me a boost even when I know everything around me is kind of out of my control. So I don't know if that's overly simplified advice, but to me, it just has helped me so much to reconnect with myself and know that no, I know myself. I know what is wrong and what's right. And I can hopefully move forward with that information and have people listen to me.
I think that that is one of the most important things, right? When we can figure out how to trust ourselves and believe in ourselves, it makes a lot of things easier. It makes a
Mhm.
lot of what we try to accomplish feel more possible. And I think it's important to remember that in a world where we don't have as much control as we'd like to have, where a lot of these systems don't really serve us, that the more we can do things to make sure that we have as solid a footing as possible, the better we are. And that we deserve that, right? Like, I think part of that means allowing yourself permission to go rock climbing or to try a different thing or to go on a vacation by yourself. You know, decide that finding a way to see a specialist that you're going to have to pay for in a different way. Like, we deserve to do different things for ourselves. And when we feel confident in ourselves, we are able to do that kind of stuff more.
I am not going to add to this because I think the two of you have really summed it up beautifully. And since this really is about it being all in her head, let's let the women end it today. Misty Pratt, thank you so much for joining us today. We love talking to you. You are wonderfully insightful, and I learned a lot.
I love talking to you too. And I just want to say that I look up to you, both of you, so much. So thank you for inviting me on. I felt like I was like so excited about coming to see you both.
Well, thank you for being here and for being our first guest. This was fantastic.
Yay!
Misty's book is All in Her Head. And where can people find you if they want to follow you?
I'm telling everyone to come find me on Substack these days because I'm writing a lot there. So it's mistypratt.substack.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for listening today. Thank you for listening to Unboxing It. We're so glad you did. If you like what you heard and you want to help us keep making episodes, please leave us a rating wherever you heard this one. You can also subscribe to the Unboxing It Substack to get access to all of the latest news and some special bonus content. And hey, truly, don't forget to find some moments of joy today. You deserve them. Take care out there, and we'll see you next time.